the international standard called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. So think of WCAG as a list of criteria for making sure your content is accessible. I believe we have about 80 success criteria in total, but the number of criteria that you'll need to meet will depend on two things. So the first is the WCAG version, and the second is the compliance level that you're targeting. So as of this recording, the latest version that we have is WCAG 2.2. So this was only released in October last year, so it's still very new and mostly includes some additions to the previous version's requirements. So basically how it works is when a new version comes out, it builds on top of the previous version. So it might add or remove some criteria, but typically all the versions are backward compatible. So that means if your website is compliant with 2.2, you're also going to be compliant with 2.1. If your website is compliant with 2.1 and you want to upgrade to 2.2, then you'll probably only need to check the handful of new requirements and not have to go through the entire 2.2 list. Although you're very welcome to, of course. And then with WCAG levels, WCAG has 3, A, AA, and AAA. So the higher you go up in level, the stricter and more requirements that you typically have to meet. And these levels are not exclusive. So in order to meet a AA level, you need to first meet all of the level A requirements and then the AA requirements on top of that. Similarly, if you want to meet a AAA level, you'll need to meet both level A and AA requirements first, and then also meet all of the AAA ones. You can't just meet all of the AAA and leave out A and AA, because firstly, that won't technically get you to a AAA standard, and second, that won't really do much for you because level A covers a lot of the basic things that you need at a minimum level, whereas AAA goes into the more nitty-gritty of things. So they usually expand on what you've already done at an A level. And like I mentioned before, there are government laws, depending on where you are, that require websites to meet a certain level. In New Zealand and in most other places, I believe, that requirement is only for 2.1 AA. I have very rarely seen a website that actually meets AAA, because even though it is the most accessible, for most websites, AAA requirements can be very strict. So you're quite limited as to what you can do on your site. So in most cases, AA is sufficient. It covers quite a lot already and provides pretty decent accessibility. So that is the most popular standard of WCAG and what you would probably want to aim for. And we've now hopefully got a pretty decent understanding of what accessibility is, and that's great. But the big question is, what can you actually do now? We know what we need to do, we know what we need to look out for, but how do we actually get started? And the first thing I think you need to do is to create a plan. So ask yourself these questions. What are the government laws in your area and do they apply to you? What level and version of WCAG do you want to target? What part of your product do you need to review? I personally recommend starting off with the most popular or most visited pages of your website, because those will benefit the most from accessibility. Who needs to be involved with the process? So pretty much think about what kind of budget and resources do you need? Do you need to provide any additional staff training, or do you need to seek any external support? And finally, what are your timelines? So when can you start and when do you want to achieve these goals by? These are just a few questions to get you started, but I think it's super important that you do ask yourself these things before you do any work, because often just saying that you want to make something accessible isn't enough. You still need to know exactly what that means and have concrete, measurable milestones that you can accomplish. And everyone has a part to play. everyone can contribute to accessibility regardless of your role. So I've just got some examples here of different responsibilities that different people might have. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list or meant to be the only responsibilities that you have, but more so just some ideas on how you can help. So if you are a product manager or a product owner, you have the overall responsibility of managing how these accessibility requirements will be met. So you'll probably play a big part in creating that plan and figuring out what and who is needed to execute it. If you are a user researcher or involved with user interaction, part of your job will be to understand what these people need and what their preferences are and include this in your work. If you are a designer, you'll need to incorporate good accessibility practices in your designs. So you'll need to have a basic understanding of accessibility requirements, like color contrast and focus states. If you are a developer, you'll need to make sure that you are writing semantic HTML and you're using the appropriate markup. So you'll be responsible for implementing the more technical aspects of accessibility. And if you're a content author, your job will be to make sure you're writing accessible content. So using simple language, using meaningful links, and using proper heading structure. Now this list could go on and on, but the point here is that just because you're not a developer or you don't have the technical skills to make the changes doesn't mean you can't be part of making something accessible. And I put together some links on this slide to help you get started with accessibility. So the first one provides some easy accessibility tips for designing, writing, and developing. So that's a great one to look at for any easy wins, and honestly, anything on that website is super useful for getting started. The second one is the link to the official WCAG 2.2 document. So this covers some background on WCAG, the requirements for each criterion, and some additional links that cover each one in detail. So this is great if you want to take a look at the standard in a little bit more depth. And the last one is WebAIM, which is just a website with some super useful resources, like the contrast checker that I use. They've also got some articles on how to write good HTML and write accessible content. So lots of great things in there, and definitely still things that I look at from time to time, so go check that out. But yeah, that's about it for today's webinar. We've covered quite a lot today, so hopefully you now have a better understanding of what web accessibility is. I know it can be quite a big topic for sure. At least it definitely seemed like that for me when I first started learning. But again, if you can break things down and focus on how you can make other people's lives easier, then you'll soon find that, accessibility isn't really as complicated as it might seem. But yeah, if you have any questions, or maybe you just want to learn more about how accessibility can benefit you or your organization, feel free to reach out to us at Catalyst. We're always striving to make accessibility a priority in our work, so don't hesitate to reach out if you're interested in learning what services we offer. And yeah, we'll wrap up here for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful and educational, and that you've learned something new. Thank you.